Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Angelita, and on the behalf of everyone at Better Red Than Dead, we are so excited to see you on Zoom, zooming in from far and wide to celebrate Ashley Kalagian Blunt's latest release, How to Be Australian. Ashley is joined in conversation tonight by author R.W.R. Rob McDonald. Please note that tonight's event is being recorded, so if you would not like to be filmed, please turn off your camera settings. Before we begin the proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. These will be different depending on where you're zooming in from. For me, it is the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that Better Red Than Dead is built. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It is currently Reconciliation Week, this year's theme being In This Together, a time for all Australians to recognise Indigenous history, culture and achievement, and to consider how each of us can contribute towards and take responsibility for reconciliation in our nation. Ashley Kalagian Blunt is the author of My Name is Revenge, which was shortlisted for the 2019 Rollara Digital Literary Award and was finalist in the 2018 Carmel Bird Digital Literary Award. Her writing appears in Griffith Review, Sydney Review of Books, Westerly, The Australian, The Big Issue, and Kill Your Darlings. Ashley is a Moth Story Slam winner and has appeared at Story Club, the National Young Writers Festival, and Sydney Writers Festival. She lived and worked in Canada, South Korea, Peru, and Mexico before moving to Australia. Rob McDonald is a Kiwi living in Melbourne with his two daughters and an extended rainbow family, including HarryCat and Stevie Nicks the chicken. Rob attended Faber Academy's Writing a Novel Stage 1 and Stage 2. His novel, The Nancies, was highly commended for an unpublished manuscript in the 2017 Victorian Premier's Literary Awards and published by Allen and Unwin in 2019. It was our book of the month on publication too. There will be a Q&A segment towards the end, so please type any questions you have for Ashley along the way into the group chat. I will read them out to her once we reach the Q&A and she will answer them via video. You can buy a signed copy of How to Be Australian on our website. There is a link you can follow in the group chat. Without further ado, here is Rob to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Angelita, and welcome to everyone. I'm thrilled that Ashley asked me to help her launch her fabulous new book, How to Be Australian. I'll take you through our run sheet for the evening. And firstly, introduce a couple of special guests we have. So Ashley wanted to also take the chance to do a fundraiser for Lone Pine Sanctuary. So for all of you at home, you might see a koala having a snooze. If you hover over and you'll see the three dots, you can actually pin that video to your screen, so your koala will be there for the whole event. I'm wondering if that's Poppy. So you can go on to koala.net. For $20, you can sponsor one of the animals there. So I sponsored Poppy. I'm just going to assume that's Poppy. Hey, Pops. So yes, thank you, Ashley, for bringing this to our attention and for incorporating this in your launch. We also have Steve Blunt. So Steve is Ashley's husband, and through the run through, I was very excited to see Steve. For those of you who have read the book already, Steve is a major character. So it was like seeing a character come to life. I was like, oh my God, it's Steve. I'm still a little bit starstruck. So without further ado, I'm going to read the back of the book, particularly for those people who have just come across it. When Ashley persuades her new husband, Steve, to leave snowy Canada and join her for a year down under, she looks forward to an easy transition. After all, Australia is just Canada with more sunshine and strange animals, right? But soon they discover things aren't so simple. Steve struggles Kettle, and Ashley fears he will come to regret both the move and the marriage, especially after she loses her wedding rings on Bondi Beach. Baffled, homesick, and increasingly anxious in a land renowned for no worries, she is preparing to return to Canada when Steve shockingly announces that he wants to stay in Australia forever. For the sake of her marriage and her happiness, Ashley must find an Australia she can belong to. She decides to travel the country, learn its history, decode its cultural quirks, and connect with as many residents as she can meet. How to Be Australian is a remarkable memoir, at once familiar and far away, that shines a fresh, funny, and fascinating light onto the country we think we know. It really is fantastic, Ashley. You've done such an amazing job. As an expat, you've made me feel incredibly lazy, but I also learnt so much from all your research that you did, to the point where I've made the setting based on Ashley's instructions. So we've got some native plants, a koala, some ice vivos and Tim Tams, and some lamingtons. So thanks for that, Ashley. So how are we going to, what's going to happen is Ashley will do a reading, we'll have a bit of a conversation, and then Ashley will cut her amazing cake. If anyone was on social media today, you might have had a sneak peek. It's incredible. Please feel free to tweet or on Instagram if you can use the hashtag #HowToBeAustralian. We also have Willow Harrington, who's live tweeting the event as well. And then after that, we'll have audience questions, so time for audience questions. So I'll now hand over to you, Ashley. If you could please give us a reading.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction, Rob. Thank you, Angelita and Better Read Than Dead. Thank you to Lone Pine for being here tonight. I hope everyone is enjoying the koalas that have joined us this evening. I'm so pleased we were able to make that work. I hope people are drinking their How to Be Australian themed cocktails that I created for not only tonight, but going forward in your life. You've got these Australian themed cocktails that I highly recommend. So this is my lemon myrtletini in a non-traditional glass. You can find those on my website. I'm going to start off, as Rob said, by doing a brief reading from a chapter where I visit Darwin. Between Sweetheart, the Cyclone exhibition, and a museum collection that introduced me to yet more toxic Australian fauna and flora, including a type of poisonous seaweed, a more accurate name for the museum would be Ways to Die and or be Maimed Horribly in the Northern Territory, which, to be honest, is exactly what I'd expected. On the way out, I stopped in the gift shop and paged through a copy of a book that was stacked in tall piles. Darwin's capacity for self-reflection seemed best represented not by the quiet, low-lit museum, but by this book, What a Crock. It collected front pages from the NT News and features headlines including Man Stabbed with Fish, Man Bashed by Prawn, juxtaposed with a photo captioned, This dog thinks he's a chicken. And for an article describing a mysterious outback crop circle, Alien Circle Work. The museum offered sharp insight into the territory's perception of itself as a tough place full of resilient people. What a Crock built on that insight, adding another essential aspect, irreverence. Canada's frozen northern territories demanded toughness and resilience as well. But if I visited Nunavut, I'd find no what a narwhal. I was about to close the book when I flipped a page and saw the headline, Why I Stuck a Cracker Up My Clacker. I turned the phrase over in my mind. I had no idea what it meant. How could I have lived here for 4 years and still encounter entire sentences out of which I could tease no meaning? I assumed cracker wasn't a savory biscuit. In Canada, we also used cracker for what I'd heard here was a popper, those decorative cardboard tubes that are placed on the Christmas dinner table to be yanked apart and thrown in the bin. But then what could a clacker be? I could hazard a guess from the context. It made vague sense that someone might insert a Christmas popper in his ass or awkwardly attempt to. But why this would be front page news, even in the NT, raised questions of its own. I could have accepted my popper theory if not for the photo accompanying the headline. It captured a 20s-ish shirtless white guy, half-empty beer bottle pressed to his lips, and dangling from the beer bottle, a green patterned snake the length of the guy's torso. Was the snake the clacker? Was the snake the cracker? Either way, this was a case of animal cruelty. Was the white guy the clacker and he'd shoved a snake up his butt? Was this photo taken pre or post insertion? As a hopefully soon to be permanent resident of Australia, these were the kind of mysteries that reminded me I was a stranger here.
Fantastic. That was one of my favorite sections of your book. Brilliant. So well done. And I love all the way through, you're trying to decode what things mean, and you're just, yeah, very, very funny. I love it. And congratulations again on writing How to Be Australian, because it is such a fun, interesting and honest account of your path to belonging and finding home in your adopted homeland of Australia. For those of you yet to read the book, and it is a real treat, we will try and keep our conversation free of spoilers. And I just wanted to start to say, look, I'm always blown away by the bravery and honesty it takes for an author to write a memoir. Like, yeah, incredible. So how did you become interested in memoir, Ashley, specifically, as opposed to fiction, say, for this book?
Well, I write both fiction and nonfiction. My first book was actually a mix of both, but because I clearly cannot commit to one or the other. But I think I like nonfiction partly because I just love seeing into other people's lives. Like, I love reading nonfiction because I love hearing about how people's lives played out and the amazing true things that have happened in the world. But I think for me as a writer, I like the limitations of the boundaries of reality. That constraint helps me because then I have that to go from. That's my starting place. And then I just have to find a way to make it interesting to the reader and to make readers connect with it. I feel like right now I'm working on a novel, and I just feel like with fiction, you could just do anything. And that's sort of too much freedom. I get all tangled up in knots with that. So I think that's why I really love memoir. But also I'm just a chronic oversharer, Rob. So that's the root of it.
Wow, perfect. No, that's fantastic. And how do you remember your whole life story? I mean, do you keep a diary or a journal? Or...
I've been so keen to show you this. Okay, so this is, I'll just see if I can show you back here. This is, these are my journals just since I moved to Australia. Wow. So this is my my current one. I'm looking forward to future historians reading about the COVID pandemic in my very glittery journal that was a gift from a very dear friend. But yeah, I do keep journals, and I definitely drew on them. But I think one of the things that I do is I take a lot of photos, and I'm just going to share right now. I'm just going to share a few photos because I think this is one of the main things that I drew on when I was writing, was when I was going through photos. So the book opens up on a -40 day in Winnipeg, and I have no photos from -40 days because it's just too cold. You can't stand outside and take a photo when it's minus 40 Celsius.
Wow.
But these are some photos from a trip to Winnipeg a few years ago. This is minus 15, which is a much more reasonable temperature. You can see Steve and I are actually having a good time outside. This was the first time in my life that I had ever been snowshoeing. It's not something we regularly do in the places I've lived in Canada, in the cities. But this was a really lovely day. This is from that same trip, and now you can see it's minus 20. You can see it gets so cold, you don't even know what temperature it is. I think this is how people picture snow, and they picture winter in cold countries, is they picture this like beautiful, pristine white, and that does look gorgeous, but this is actually more what you get. You can see these vehicles are just filthy from the snow. You wash your car, it gets filthy immediately, and you're driving through this mess. You're driving through this absolute mess. And you can see these snowbanks on the sides of the roads make it really, really difficult to navigate your way, particularly, if you're backing out of a driveway, for example, you're really doing that blind. So I drew on a lot of photos. I also, since being in Australia, I just take photos of everything that I find just curious. So for example, these kangaroos from a home in the Blue Mountains, I just love them. I'm like, the first time I saw them, I thought, okay, so is this what people do here instead of lions? Like, is this like common? Am I going to see a lot of this? I've never seen them anywhere else. This is the only driveway kangaroos. This is a gingerbread house where they've used ice bobos for the shingles, which I love.
Yeah.
I just collect all the pictures. This is Steve talking to a man dressed as a giant, like a man-sized sausage in a bun. So they have this very serious discussion about the difference between sausages and hot dogs, because this guy was very insistent that he was not a hot dog. This is some wallpaper featuring Gillard and Rudd and Abbott. When I was in the Northern Territory, I was obsessed with Paul's Iced Coffee, because it's so integrated into the identity there that they actually use the shape of the Northern Territory in their product marketing, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
So those are some of the photos that I drew on in writing the book. But like I said, it's between the photos and the journals, I feel like I have this huge archive.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so when did you start writing How to Be Australian? Because the book starts in 2011?
Yes, this book starts in 2011 when we Steve and I, well, technically it starts in 2002. There's a bit of a
Oh, yeah.
But we land in Australia February 2011, and that's when the book starts. I started writing it in 2015, and the way that happened was I had written a previous memoir that was about living in Korea, Peru, and Mexico. And I'd sent it to a manuscript assessor who was recommended to me by the fabulous Walter Mason, who's here tonight. And she had said, oh, I really enjoyed this. One of my thoughts was that your next one could be about Australia. And I read that comment and I thought, I don't think I have anything to say about Australia. But because she'd sort of planted that idea in my head, I just thought, well, I'll just start taking notes. I'll just start, make some notes and I'll just see. And one day I opened my notes file and I had 20,000 words in there.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, maybe I have something to say about Australia after all. And that was 2015 and it's 2020 and now it's a book.
Brilliant. So for looking back, say in your starting 2015, looking back in 2011 or even 2012, how was it for you? How did you capture the emotion of events that were happening in your past? Like, was that difficult?
I think the journals really help with that, because the journals are a lot of very raw emotion. But also, to give this some context, so this book takes place from 2011 to 2016, because in 2016, I got citizenship.
Yep.
So, but the next major event that happened in my life was that in 2017, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I was at home a lot, particularly 2017 and 2018. I was home almost all the time by myself, and was very sick. And so that was when I was doing the bulk of this writing. And I think the emotion that I was most working through was actually humor. I was trying to make myself laugh, because when I had the energy to work on the book, that was what I wanted. I wanted to write about all the things that made me feel joyful and all the things that made me happy. And my goal was always to make myself laugh first. And if I could do that, then that was a really good writing session. And so there's lots of really serious and really heartfelt stuff in the book that I drew from the journals. And I think was also easy to tap into because I was having such a hard time being ill. But I think writing this book was really restorative for me through that illness. And when I think about that time, I think about the writing of this book and how much joy it brought me.
Fantastic. Yeah, because you really do get the joy absolutely comes through. And I guess this is sort of a nice segue, because I think you brilliantly share your mental health journey in the book as well. Was that important for you to highlight in How to Be Australian?
Absolutely. I think the experiences that I described, like this book is focuses on learning to cope with anxiety, because I was newly married, and Steve and I had moved to this country. And like I said, I'd been living in Korea, Peru, and Mexico prior to this. I'd been moving pretty much every year of my adult life prior to coming to Australia. And then all of a sudden we got to Australia, and we stopped, and we were like, okay, things are really good here, so let's just stay for a little while, which was fine. But it was sort of that, well, how long is a little while? And I wasn't fully employed at the time, and all of a sudden I found myself all this time on my hands in this place that I really enjoyed being here, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay here. And my anxiety started to spiral out of control. And the thing about mental illness, particularly with anxiety and depression, is they're really good at convincing you that you're not sick, you're just inferior. And so I know so many of my friends who have gone through similar things, and I think it's really important that we just talk about it more. And so I want to talk about it in the book. I wanted to share those experiences because, again, I think they're really common. And I feel so strongly about talking about health that a friend and I are actually, we just launched a podcast talking about writing and health.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's up now. It's available now. It's called James and Ashley Stay at Home, and you can check it out.
Yeah.
All the podcast apps. So we're talking about all aspects of the health, both chronic health, mental health, because I just think it's important that we just feel more comfortable. If I had been able to talk to other people, because I poured everything onto Steve, and you see that in the book. I just dumped everything onto Steve, and I just expected him to just somehow figure out how to save me. But I didn't tell anyone else about it. And I had a reader comment recently that she's like, I was so surprised to read about your struggles with anxiety, because, whenever I've interacted with you, you always seem so confident. And it's just because I was really good at hiding it. I was really good at hiding it.
And it was so wonderful, the way that you shared that, because I think, as a traveler as well, where you are away from your home country, it is, you've got that isolation on top of it. And I think you captured that beautifully as well. And, there's you and Steve, and that idea of being stationary, and then you really have to deal with, what it is. It's you really have to actually get to know yourself and work through that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think you capture it so beautifully in the book. That was, along with the humor, I thought that was, it was incredible. So now we've heard about the NT Times, which I loved. So what was the strangest fact that you discovered in your Australian journey as you were trying to decode this new homeland?
There's so many strange facts. The book is just full of strange facts. I love Australia because it is so baffling and strange and wonderful. So I'm going to share one of my absolute favorite stories right now, and we're going to go back to these slides for a second.
That's good.
And I'm going to tell you about the Birdman of the Coorong, because this is one of my favorite stories. So the Birdman of the Coorong is my favorite bushranger, because of course I have a favorite bushranger. And he was a tiny Irish guy. Like he was very short, probably 4 feet or maybe less. And he'd immigrated to Australia in the 1800s. And he was living in South Australia in this area known as the Coorong, which is this really sandy, marshy area on the coast. And this guy figured out he could ride emu back because he was so small and light. And so he started holding people up on emu back. And this was strategic for him because the police were all on horseback. And so he would rob people and then he would take off into the Coorong. And because it was so sandy, the emu could just tear across it. But the police horses, they got, stuck in the sand and they couldn't keep up.
Right.
Now this guy was really eccentric, and you might be able to see in that photo that he loved robbing women of their jewelry, and he would wear all these jewels that he had stolen. And so people would see him wearing all this jewelry, and they think he had the equivalent of $1 million in today's money of jewelry
Wow.
stolen. And he would wear it around on his emu. And then one day was, in the midst of robbing someone, he robbed the wrong person, and they shot him. And he was bleeding profusely, but he was still on his emu, and the emu took off again into the Coorong. And the guy who shot him was following, and you could see the trail of blood. Like, you could see, like, this guy was, going to bleed out. But because, again, he headed off into the Coorong, he took off, and he was never seen again. And so they think that his body is still somewhere buried in the sand in the Coorong with all of this jewelry around his neck. Now, this story may be apocryphal, and I do not care. It is my favorite story, and I love it. And this little town, I think it's Meninge on the coast of the Coorong, they've actually built this emu that you can have your photo with this emu in honor of the Birdman of the Coorong. So that's my favorite Australian anecdote.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that and letting us know about that. Yeah, that's something I'm definitely be telling the kids afterwards.
You can take your metal detector and you can go spend your holiday out in the Coorong searching for all this jewelry, finders keepers.
That's amazing. We need a like a movie or something of the emu bushranger. Now I have actually a question for Steve, if that's all right, Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, hi.
Hi, Rob.
How did you feel about becoming a character in Ashley's book? And were you ever worried about how you might be portrayed?
I still am. We're in kind of a long-winded legal debate on this one. But seriously, no, it's been an interesting journey. I did ask for veto power on any of my quotes just to make sure that nothing too crazy got out there, or at least if it was on mark.
Yeah, right.
But overall, I mean, it was really interesting to see, I think as any couple will attest to, the other person's perspective on a shared event, and particularly seeing how that plays out in a book when they're writing your lines. Yeah. So there's a few points where I'm like, I'm pretty sure I didn't say that, but it's a book, so.
Yeah.
Pretty sure you did.
Anyway, Anyway, our lawyers will sort that one out. But it was fun to relive some of our moments through that. And I obviously, I did quite enjoy the Steve character. I thought he was fairly well written.
It was very well written, and I think you came across, very, very well. But yeah, it must have been quite odd. Well, not odd, but I guess, a very intimate kind of portrayal of yourself.
Yeah.
By that, I don't mean it's not, scenes.
Yeah, it's not that kind of book, people. But yeah, it is interesting where, you know, you don't expect to see, as somebody who doesn't do a lot of social media, it's interesting to see all of a sudden a lot of your shared stuff in a book.
Yes.
So I didn't see that one coming, but that said, very proud of Ashley. I know this has been a long time coming, so it's a huge event. So yeah, we're very excited and proud. Oh, and we've got, I think we're only down to one koala butt now, just for those keeping count. Sorry to change the topic here. But I will just, if anyone, you know, of note is listening, I am calling dibs on the Steve character if this goes to a TV series and or movie.
Okay, brilliant.
I should just say it was interesting because my writers group, after I got sick, they started meeting at my place, which was very kind of them. And so we would be in the middle of our meeting where we'd be workshopping a chapter where Steve was a prominent character. And then the door would open and Steve would walk in and there would be this real awkward silence among the group. But he was the fan favorite. The group loved him. I think I saw someone in the comments saying it, you know, he's the true star of the book. So he was very popular.
Yeah, and yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was so excited to finally get to see him in real life. No, that's great. Thank you. Ashley, I'd just like to talk about your writing process. So how do you like to write? I mean, do you have a set routine? Are you sort of, I need to get up at 6 a.m. and write for 2 hours, or is it more organic?
Well, it used to be, and like Steve would tell you, that my preferred routine is to get up as early as possible and sit down and just write. And that's how I would love to start my days. Chronic fatigue really has destroyed any sense of routine in any aspect of my life. Like, it's really, really hard to keep a routine because I just don't know what my energy levels will be like and how well I'll feel day to day, which makes planning anything difficult. This book, like I said, I started in 2015, but it was interrupted first because I was accepted into a master's program where I actually wrote My Name is Revenge. So I had to put this book on hold, and I would sometimes like sneak away and work. It was like my secret affair while I was working on Revenge. And then I finished my degree and I thought, great, this is fantastic. I'm just gonna focus on this book. And then a few months later, I was diagnosed with the fatigue. So I think this book is a real testament to pushing through. Like, if I can get this book out despite the fatigue, yeah, it's a real testament to pushing through.
Yeah, well done. So did publishing your first book, My Name is Revenge, change your process of writing, or were they sort of in tandem? So
I think Revenge taught me a lot. So it changed the way I write, it changed how I structure a scene, it changed how I approach. Like, My Name is Revenge is the first book that I used a spreadsheet to structure it. And from now on, I will always use a spreadsheet to structure any writing project. So it changed it in that sense. Thank you. Got my cup here too.
just for those.
And just Revenge is trying to claim back some of the spotlight because it was just longlisted for the David Awards.
Yes, congratulations.
I think it's feeling jealous of the new.
Trying to upstage your new book. Yeah,
exactly. But I think what really changed with publishing the first book was it just made it feel so much more achievable. Like, I've been writing for years. Like, I started writing seriously in 2009. So this, you know, we're talking a decade ago. Yeah. And when Revenge came out last year, that really made it feel like, okay, this is achievable. This is something I can do. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, back to How to Be Australian. What did you edit, if anything, out of the book?
Oh, so much stuff came out. Partly just for space. So
yep.
There's a lot of stuff that came out for space. My writers group likes, James Watson, who's in my writers group, likes to joke about how, you know, there are all these sex scenes in the book, and he the writers group encouraged me to take them all out. So there's no sex scenes in the book anymore. But what did come out, the one scene I really would wish was in there was I wrote this scene about how Steve and I met, and it was originally up front in the book, and it came out for structural reasons, which I totally understand. But it was this really gorgeous scene. So when we met, I was 18 years old. I was working in a secondhand bookshop / comic book shop, and it was the middle of winter, and Steve came in to buy his Spider-Man comic. And I knew he was coming in that day because I called him to tell him that like this comic that we'd ordered him was in. It was a particular issue of The Amazing Spider-Man that he really wanted. And so I didn't know him at all other than from this order. But I'd seen him when he placed the order, and I knew he was really hot. And the guy I'd been seeing had broken up with me the night before. It wasn't a very serious relationship. It was like a 2-week thing. But I was like, oh, I don't have a date for the weekend. Like, what am I gonna do? This hot guy is coming in. I need to. So I told all my coworkers, I was like, when this guy comes in, I want to talk to him. And then of course, he comes in like right at the end of the day, and I'm trapped at the back of the store with some guy who's like wants to find some book on like knitting with cat hair or something. And I mean, I can see him. I can see Steve's at the front of the store. I didn't even like. I was like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to get to him. And he leaves, and I was just like, it's like -20. I'm in a t-shirt. I was like, whatever. I gotta talk to this guy. So I ran out into the parking lot. It's freezing cold, and I was like, hey. And he turns around, probably thinking he'd forgotten his wallet or something. And then I realized I hadn't planned what I was gonna say at all. No, I'm this crazy person in the parking lot. So I blurted, if I gave you my number, would you call me? Because I didn't even know he was single. And yeah, he took my number and he called me about 5 days later to prove he wasn't desperate. And yeah, he's still around today.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I love that.
Thanks.
So what was your highlight when writing How to Be Australian?
Two things were my highlight. One was making my writers group laugh, because like I said, I was very alone, and so one of the things I really looked forward to was when my writers group would come over. Like it made the world of difference just to have people come and visit me when I was so sick and not able to work very much, and not able to socialize very much. This was like a thing that really was the highlight of my month, and still is. So if I could make them laugh, then I knew I was doing something right. And they would mark up in my chapters the things that they liked, but also they would come with their own stories and their own jokes, and they would tell me stuff, and we just have a great time just like talking about all the stuff in the book. And so all the members of my writing group, like they each have at least one like killer joke in there. Like I feel like all the best parts of the book are thanks to them. So that was one of the real highlights. The other one was the book. I shared this incredible story of watching this Aboriginal male pole dance performer on a non-Australia Day event, and how that really changed my understanding of what Australia could be, because he was incorporating aspects of contemporary dance with his pole dance performance. And his name is Matty Shields. He's a Kamilaroi man. He was on Australia's Got Talent in 2011. He made it to the semifinals. He's so talented. So I'd written about that in the book. And then a few years later, I was telling a friend about it. And she said, oh, I think I know that guy. He's housemates with a friend of mine. I was like, what? Like, so she set it up so that I got to meet him, and he was the nicest guy, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And he very kindly shared his story with me and has allowed me to share it in the book. And I think that's one of the real highlights of the book, is that because he's so different from me, it really highlights the diversity of experience, across lives in Australia. Yeah. And yet at the same time, there's so many ways our stories connect, and so many themes in common. And so I was so happy to share his story.
That was, yeah, I mean, that was fantastic in the book. When you get to meet him at the end, particularly when you're talking about the impact that it has when you watch that and what it means, and your openness to trying to understand the First Nations people and government policies, all of those things, and then to have that in the towards the end of the book, I think was it was so moving and fantastic to read and hear, to get to hear his story as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, writing a memoir definitely takes great courage, I think, to reveal such personal stories. What advice can you offer a writer who's struggling with the decision of whether or not to write and share their story?
That's a great question. Thank you. I feel like I said up top, I'm a chronic oversharer. So for me, it was very easy to make that decision. If someone is struggling with it, I think the first thing is to just write it. Just don't worry about who's going to read it. Just write it for yourself first. And then once you have that material there, you can decide, is this something I would be comfortable having out in public? Do I want to fictionalize it? Like, how do I want to approach this? But I think the key step is just to turn off that external audience and just write your story for yourself before you start shutting yourself down, worrying about, how's so-and-so going to react to it, or how's everyone going to react to it. Just write it for yourself.
I think that's really great advice. Absolutely. And finally, what do you hope your readers take away from this fantastic book?
I really, really hope that people take the humor and the joy from it. If nothing else, that humor and joy, particularly because 2020 has been such a tough year for everybody in so many different ways. I really hope people connect with the humor and the joy. There's so much I love. Being in Australia every day makes me so happy. And there's the book acknowledges that there's so much that is not good here.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to overlook that. But I think if people can connect with that humor and that joy, I hope that just, brightens their lives for a little bit. And also just the chance to appreciate Australia through the eyes of a newcomer, just to see it in that different light. I think if someone had written this book about the Canadian prairies and I had read that when I was younger, I think I would have had a completely different appreciation for the place that I lived, because I just saw it as just like the everyday place. And I wish someone had written this book and I'd gotten to read that. And I just want to say to people, I'm really happy to hear from readers. It makes me so happy connecting with Australians and hearing their stories. Really, I'd love to hear from them. I'm happy to Zoom into book club meetings, and I have, a book club discussion guide on my website. I've got those cocktail recipes on my website, so I highly recommend, have your book club meeting, use the discussion guide, make the cocktails, invite me along. I'd love to talk to you. So yeah, I hope to connect with people through the book.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ashley. I've just got this to show Sharon Livingston. There's the caramel slices, which feature heavily in the book. So if everyone at home can raise a glass to Ashley, and we'll officially launch her fantastic book. To Ashley.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I really appreciate all the people who are here right now on Zoom. I'm sure you probably had a long day in front of Zoom already and you're here, so thank you for that.
So I will hand over to you now, Ashley.
Okay, so
you're going to have the cake.
Steve's about to step into frame because it is cake time. So you can see this is the cake. It is a chocolate mud cake.
Amazing.
Printed with the book cover. So Steve's going to bring that back in a second. But first, I am going to do some thank yous. So, as I said, thank you to everyone who is here tonight. It means so much to me. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that this book was written both on and about. And in my case, currently right now, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land across Australia, particularly as Angelita said, it's National Recognition Week, Reconciliation Week, apologies. Thank you, Rob, so much for doing a fantastic job tonight. This has been amazing. Thank you to Better Read Than Dead and Angelita for being fantastic. Thank you to Lone Pine and the koalas. We've got a little bit of a koala in the corner of the screen right now. Thank you so much to Steve for being part of this. He's currently lighting a sparkler on the cake. I want to thank Affirm Press for bringing this book into the world. Thank you so much to Martin Hughes and my editor, Coco, and my publicist, Terry, and everyone at Affirm. I know you've been doing a ton of work, and I really just can't thank you enough. I've mentioned my writers group a bunch, and I really want to call out James Mackenzie Watson, Simon Bexner, Jonathan Shannon, Amanda Ortlip, and Andrea Thomas, who did so much work on this book, and members of the writers group from the past as well, who, you know, as I said, I've been working on this for years. I'd like to thank the fabulous people of RPA Toastmasters. I know a whole bunch of you are here tonight. There is a scene in the book at the club, so thank you so much for being part of that journey. I met so many wonderful people through my Toastmasters club. I want to thank Writing New South Wales and the people I work with there. They are doing so much to support writers across New South Wales and Australia, and I just have learned so much from them, and I'm so grateful to learn from them every day. I'd like to thank Walter Mason, Vicki Laveau-Harvey, Catherine Collette, and Lee Kaufman, who provided endorsements for the book and are just amazing all-around people. I want to do a special shout out to the First Time podcast for really supporting writers, and just I've learned so much from them. They're incredible. And there's about 1,000 other people who I want to thank. Please read the acknowledgements in the book. The people in there are just, they're all incredible. And I could not have done this without them. I really couldn't have. So with that being said, we're gonna pull this cake back. We're gonna celebrate all the fantastic people who have been part of this journey. And we're gonna cut a piece of cake. You want? Okay, I'm gonna cut a piece of cake. I'm gonna do this upside down.
Actually, maybe.
Yeah, you do it. I'm gonna angle the cake up a bit while you cut. This is a chocolate mud cake.
Looks amazing.
From a place called Mezzapica in Leichhardt, and Writing New South Wales people will know that place because we got a cake from there once for an event, and it was the best cake I have ever eaten.
We are not getting a commission for this.
Yeah, we didn't even get a discount on the cake.
Yeah, so Mezzapica, if you're listening, this next book, free cake.
Okay, so Steve and I had this debate about whether or not I should eat the cake on screen. Steve said no one wants to see a person eat a slice of cake on camera.
There could actually be money in that.
Well, someone told me today that apparently there's a YouTube channel which is just devoted to a woman eating pickles. So, but I'm just gonna have, we negotiated one bite. I get to have one, oh boy. If I can pull it off, I get to have one bite of this cake, so. Yeah. That's my one cake bite.
Well done. So now are we with Angelita for the audience questions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have a few already, but if anyone has some other questions, please type them in now. So our first question was from Lindsay Weaver, and she has asked, what was it like to alternate between the seriousness and deep sadness of My Name is Revenge to a very different book tonally?
Oh, wow, Lindsay, that is a great question. And thank you for getting up at 4:30 in the morning, Toronto time, to be with us. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think, okay, so I'm a Gemini. Not that I believe in astrology, like I don't read my horoscope, but I really do feel like there's sort of, I have two sides. And one side is very seriously interested in genocide. One side is very seriously interested in jokes. So I say that My Name is Revenge is a book about genocide with a few jokes, and How to Be Australian is a book about jokes with a couple of genocides. So yeah, I just naturally live in those two worlds at the same time, I guess.
Okay, our next question is from Andrew Patterson, and he said he hasn't had a chance to read it yet, but he's wondering if the infamous drop bear gets a mention.
It does actually get a mention, and actually gets a very specific mention at the citizenship ceremony. So, and I will leave you to discover that in the last chapter of the book.
Oh, that's exciting. Our next question is from Adeline Tier, and she has asked, there must have been so much material. How did you decide what to keep and what to jettison?
I have to thank my editor for helping with that, because she was very good at jettisoning some of the material. Yeah, I think it was, I mean, as a writer, I think it was based on the strength of the scene, because there were so many things I wanted to mention, but if I couldn't weave them constructively into a scene, then they just became a bunch of random facts. So what ended up making the final cut were the strongest scenes, really. So like I said, I love talking about Australiana, and I have like so many things that didn't make it in the book. So yeah, but I think what is in the book is the best of the best for that reason.
Okay, our next question is from Zora Ali. Ashley, how did you write in journals? Was it chronological or different topics in different journals?
Chronological. I usually sit down and write about whatever's going on at the time in my life. So ideally I would write every day, but once again, it's like all of those things. That's the plan and then it doesn't happen. But I write probably more than 50% of the time. So, you know, I'll cover whatever days since my last entry. And yeah, that's how I do it. And more I've begun to take the David Sedaris approach, where I write more and more about what I observe in the world around me, as opposed to my early journals, which are all about the emotional turmoil that I'm experiencing.
Dawn Tufton wants to know what your favorite book about Australia is, and also if you've ever read Bill Bryson's Notes from a Big Country.
I've read all of Bill Bryson's canon. I'm a big Bill Bryson fan, and so I hope that if you're a Bill Bryson fan, you'll see echoes of him in my book. Yeah, definitely love him. My favorite book about Australia. There's so many great books. So many great books. I think I'd like to mention Stan Grant, because I think it's really important that we're reading our Indigenous authors. Oh, and Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu. I learned so much from that book, and it was completely mind-blowing. And the knowledge that, you know, traditional owners have about the land is just incredible, and I highly recommend everyone read Bruce Pascoe's book. And also David Hunt is a local Sydney historian who's written a couple books on the history of Australia, and he's fantastic at using a lot of humor to talk about, you know, fairly dry history. So I highly recommend David Hunt's books as well.
Why Tim wants to know if you'd consider writing something similar for Canada or maybe another place.
Definitely Canada. I think there would definitely be, if there was a time in my life where I go back and spend significant time in Canada, which, I mean, all my family and Steve's family are still there, so that's still, you know, something that could happen. I think definitely writing about Canada, now that I've lived outside Canada practically all my adult life. So I think I would see it through very fresh eyes and take the same approach as with this book and try to educate myself about it. And I think that could make for a really, really interesting book. And I still think about returning to that book about living in Korea, Peru, and Mexico, because that was such a formative time in my life when I was, you know, Steve and I had been dating for 4 years in Canada before I left, and then trying to negotiate our relationship long distance and figure out a life for ourselves from those places. And I really feel like I'm the person I am because I went and lived in those countries.
Amanda Ortlep has asked, now that you've been in Australia for a long time, do you feel more Australian or Canadian?
Oh, I think I'll always feel more Canadian, simply because, partly because of my accent, because that's how people interact with me. And also because that was the first way I saw myself in the world. Like when I moved to Korea and when I lived in Peru and Mexico, like I was Canadian in Canada, but then I became very Canadian in those places. Like that's how I was identified. So I think I'll always understand myself as very Canadian, but I do feel, particularly with this book coming out, it's made me realize how comfortable I feel with my Australian identity. Like I really feel like I can navigate conversations with Australians in a way that identifies me as a compatriot. And I really enjoy that. So yeah, I feel like I've grown into that Australian identity, that the book is really a journey of developing that.
Those are all the questions that we have for now. Just in case anyone wants to ask something else, I'm going to ask something myself and then they can type anything into the group chat. I'm just wondering if you have a favorite Australian colloquialism.
Oh my gosh. So many. I just learned the term sports baller the other day and I am now obsessed with sports baller. But my favorite Australian colloquialism, I really love to suss something out. I think that's a fun phrase and it's one you can use in the office. Like you can be like, yeah, suss it out. And I just think that's just like, I feel joy every time I say that. And also take a squiz because that doesn't sound like a thing you should say in polite company, but you can. And that's really great.
Felicity wants to know what a sports baller is, and I can't say I know what a sports baller is either.
So apparently a sports baller, this is the definition I was given, is that it's anyone who's involved in sport, and even that includes fans. So whether you play a sport or whether you're a big fan of sport, you can use the term sports baller to describe all of those people, and I think that's wonderful. But this is another thing, like I know Felicity's Australian, like grew up in Western Sydney. And I think this is also what's fascinating about Australia is someone will teach me a word and they'll be like, oh, this is a really Aussie word. And then I'll bring it up with other Australians and they'll be like, I've never heard that word. So there's always this sort of debate. I remember I was taught the word razzle dazzle for a merry-go-round and I just thought that was the best thing ever. And then other people were like, no, people are taking the piss. That's not an Australian term. But then I found the ABC used it. So I figure it's gotta be a regionalism.
Lindsay has asked for a definition on take a squiz too.
Oh, take a squiz is to like look something over. So like if you're handed a document, Lindsay, you gotta use that. Lindsay works for the New York Times. So Lindsay, I think it's your responsibility now to work that into the New York Times office vocabulary. So take a squiz is to like, yeah, look something over.
Oh, sorry, and I missed a question at the very beginning. Rebecca wanted to know if you're wearing the same scarf tonight as you were in the photos that you shared with us.
I probably am. Actually, I didn't even think about that, Rebecca, but this is my mother gave me this scarf and it's got moose on it. It's red and white, like the Canadian flag, but then it's got moose on it. So that's my, I've paired my very Canadian scarf with my golden wattle brooch. So those are, yeah, two of my favorite things. And I've color matched myself to the cover of the book. I just need the blue. I'm missing the blue, but I feel like Better Read Than Dead brings the blue. So
we do bring the blue.
and you were nicely paired as well with the book, Angela.
Yes,
I appreciate that.
I'm glad you noticed.
You're really bringing it. Thank you.
That's okay. Dawn wants to know what your favorite Canadian expression is.
My favorite Canadian expression. I mentioned this. I mentioned this on my website recently. Is that I don't feel like Canada. Like I know a lot of Canadian expressions. I know a few Canadian phrases. I still use the word toque. Toque is a woolen beanie. I refuse to use the word beanie because it just sounds like a word for children. So I still say toque. And that's a woolen hat. And we use clicks for kilometers, which I just assumed everybody used. Like Arvo, it's a very useful abbreviation. So we'll say, oh yeah, it's 20 clicks from here to wherever. And I found out that other countries don't use that. And I think they should. I think Australia should adopt clicks.
I think that's all the questions that we have for tonight. So I might wrap things up by saying thank you to everyone for participating in this very special event. It was a pleasure for Better Read Than Dead to host. If you'd like to purchase How to Be Australian, please follow the link provided in the group chat. And if you'd like a signed copy personalized, please remember to fill out your request in the order comments, and Ashley and Better Read will arrange that for you. Thank you, Rob, for being here. And thank you, Steve, for helping out. And of course, Lone Pine Koalas, you've been amazing. And thank you, Ashley, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, again. This has been so amazing. And thank you, Better Read Than Dead, for hosting this. It's been really fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
Good night, everyone.
If you want cake, swing by.